We could call this week's waiver show the fraud check. We got some guys over the weekend inflating their perceived values with touchdowns and other out of character performances. But does that mean you should pass on the surprise week 13 performers in your waiver runs this week? No. It just means we need to sort them out. And that's exactly what we're going to do on an all new Draft Sharks podcast right now. Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to get you set for your Week 14 waiver wire runs. We're almost to the end here, Jared. Definitely almost to fantasy playoff time. So all these decisions take on even more importance as you get into that, as you maybe hope to get into the playoffs, as you set your roster. And let's start this discussion with a pair of targets at running back who present different profiles depending on what you might need or want. We've got Devin Singletary and Blake Corum. And Jared, let's go Devin Singletary first because he kind of emerged last night as we're recording this Tuesday afternoon in that Monday night game against the Patriots. Game was never really close, but Singletary, interestingly, put up some pretty good production, 12 carries, 68 yards, and a touchdown on the ground against a Patriots defense that's been one of the toughest in the league against the run this year. Also 3 catches for 34 yards. Now, you might point at that and say, yeah, Tyrone Tracy left with an injury. Of course, Singletary got an opportunity in a game where they were already trailing by a lot. Singletary was already working ahead of, not working ahead, but outproducing Tyrone Tracy before Tracy's injury that happened in the fourth quarter of that game. So I know that we got right before coming on this show and starting the recording, the update that Tracy doesn't expect the injury to be all that serious. Seems like he expects to play after their week 14 bye, but I'm not sure that keeps Devin Singletary from being interesting fantasy-wise.
No, he's still worth owning in basically all fantasy leagues at this point. I do think he has some standalone value. The Giants' backfield has been tough to figure out since Cam Scatterbo went down. Tracy seemed to be kind of pulling ahead as the clear leader there until last night. And Singletary came out. They were splitting right from the get-go. Seemed kind of like a hot hand situation to me. Singletary had a few nice runs early on in the game and kind of kept rolling. So I think if Tracy's healthy, it's going to be a tough projection. Now, I'm still not convinced Tracy's out of the woods. We see players be over-optimistic about their injuries all the time. Tracy was carted back to the locker room after suffering that hip injury. Now, he does get the week 14 bye, which is well-timed for him. But I think Singletary, if nothing else, is worth stashing while we wait for confirmation that Tracy is going to be okay for week 15. Because if Tracy does not play in week 15 and beyond, I think Singletary, you're going to find him well inside the top 30 in our running back rankings, if not inside the top 25, because the rest of this running back room, it's Eric Gray, and they have Dante Miller on their practice squad. So if Tracy misses time, I think Singletary is going to get 70 to 80% of this backfield work. And we know any running back getting that type of volume is going to be a decent fantasy starter.
I can already see the comment, by the way, on YouTube. Yeah, thanks, guys. Singletary has already been owned in my league for like 6 weeks. So if that's the case, this one's not for you. We've got more players coming up. We've got more players in the article on DraftSharks.com. So, either skip ahead or check out the article for more stuff. But Singletary is rostered in just 44% of sleeper leagues, 22% of Yahoo leagues as of this taping, 29% on ESPN. So he's available in a lot of places, probably more than he should have been given the standing. And even though the Giants have not been an offense that we really want to tap for fantasy value this year, the running backs collectively still rank 15th in PPR points per game. Got a big boost from a couple of, high touchdown Cam Scatterbo games in there, but still, there are fantasy points to mine. There are teams in need. So Devin Singletary is worth a pickup. And to your point on the injury front, right after the game where J.K. Dobbins went down for the season, it turns out he thought he was going to be fine the following week. Like, he was mad that he hurt his foot, but he was like, yeah, I'm all right. And then the next day clearly got the news that it was more serious than he thought. So we'll see how serious Tyrone Tracy's injury is. And kind of the reason that this is even relevant going forward is that their matchups are pretty good after that week 14 bye. They get Washington in week 15, Minnesota week 16, the Raiders week 17. Those are 3 non-scary defenses, non-scary run defenses, and 3 opponents that aren't likely to enter those games as at least significant favorites over the Giants, if favorites at all.
Yeah, exactly. And, since Mike Kafka took over as interim head coach, the Giants have been the run heaviest offense in terms of pass rate over expected, negative 11%. The Monday night's game against the Patriots was just unserious. They fall down by 17 and they're still running the ball down multiple scores in the fourth quarter. They had no interest in winning that game. They looked like they kind of wanted to just get out of there. So, that's a concern at this time of the year. I think we do need to start factoring in, motivation into our, outlooks for these guys, but it sure seems like the Giants just kind of want to lean on the running game the rest of the way, which is good news for Singletary and Tracy if he's able to make it back.
I would say specific to the Giants, once it became clear that they were not going to win that game, you want to protect Jackson Dart, especially in his first game back from a concussion. So we'll see what changes going forward, but the whole scenario certainly should help the rushing volume for that team. So Devin Singletary is interesting. Blake Corum, of course, the other running back I mentioned, we've already talked about him on this show. I believe it was 2 weeks ago. He was our focal point, maybe even 3 weeks ago at this point. And he was two available, we said then. He remains two available across league hosting sites. The touchdown run this past week is going to get Blake Corum some more attention, but he's really just still a high value handcuff who remains too highly available, right?
Yeah, I can't believe we're still having to talk about Blake Corum. Like, he is the exact guy you want to be stashing at the end of your bench at this point of the season. Because I think if Kyren Williams went down, and Williams, by the way, suffered an ankle injury near the end of the first half of that game this past week, was deemed questionable to return, did end up returning and playing the rest of the second half. So not an issue going forward, I don't think. But like when that injury happened, I was like, oh, damn. Blake Corum's about to be a top 12 running back the rest of the way or forever long. Kyren Williams out. And that's why he needs to be rostered.
And Blake Corum, by the way, scored his touchdown right after that happened because that was a Kyren Williams drive, and then he left the game, and then Blake Corum ran it in. And as a Kyren Williams owner, I was like, crap.
Yeah, these guys continue to rotate drives. It hasn't been enough to make Corum a standalone fantasy option. He is RB 49 in expected PPR points per game over the last 5 weeks, RB 53 in actual PPR points per game. But on a week like this with 4 teams on bye, Corum does check in like right around RB 40 in our ranking. So if you're desperate, he's someone who, is probably going to give you 6 to 10 carries, but then you're stashing him because of the handcuff value. He's a league winner if Kyren Williams gets hurt over these final few weeks of the year.
Yeah, and he's even a deep flex option for certainly non-PPR, maybe half PPR this week. There have been 3 games this year where Blake Corum hit double-digit carries. All 3 of those were games where they won by 16 plus points. They're playing Arizona this week. As we speak, the Rams are 8.5 point favorites. So it could be a game that sees them get more rushing volume, maybe an opportunity to rest some of those passing game pieces a little bit. But certainly, as we said, you're not picking up Blake Corum because he's a starting option. It's because of that extreme handcuff value. So if you're sitting there like, I need to pick up a running back this week, who should I pick up between Blake Corum and Devin Singletary? Honestly, it totally depends on what you need. Neither one is likely to help you in week 14. Obviously, the Giants aren't playing at all. We just talked about how Blake Corum remains behind Kyren Williams. A chance, certainly any week that he scores a touchdown, but the touchdown he scored Sunday was the first one he'd scored since week 2. So he's not even, that good a bet on that front. So if you need a running back that's going to be an option for you over the next 3 weeks, then Singletary is the leader because as we laid out, even if Tracy's healthy, Singletary has a chance to be the better Giants back in any given game. And, Tracy, we are still waiting to see on that hip injury. So if he's out, then Singletary obviously becomes an even stronger starting bet. If you're just looking for an upside stash, whether you have Kyren Williams or not, that's Blake Corum, because if Kyren Williams does miss any game time, like you just said, Jared, Corum's probably somewhere inside our top 20 at running back.
Yep. I'd say if you'd been relying on Tyrone Tracy as a starter for you, it's probably worth grabbing Singletary just to, have that backfield locked up. Hopefully, either Tracy misses or Tracy kind of reemerges as the lead guy. If you're weak at running back and like Singletary would be one of your best 3 options, he's probably the add over Corum. Otherwise, and I think a lot of teams, heading into the playoffs at this point are strong enough at running back where, you don't need Singletary. So in that case, I would rather stash Corum for that ultimate ceiling.
And that's what I would do at this point anyway, is target those handcuffs. And now's the time of year where I'm even more interested in the handcuff to my own running back. And we'll hit that before we get to the end of the running back section here. So we start out the year by saying you don't want to draft the handcuff to your running backs on your roster. I think that this is the time of year where that shifts some. And, hearing that might make you think, well, if you're interested in having your own running backs handcuffed now, then why not just draft him so you don't have to compete for him on waivers? You can do that if you want. The issue, though, is that you're locking up a roster spot all season long, hindering your own flexibility on waivers. And then if your starter stays healthy, then you've got nothing out of that spot. Whereas from the beginning of the year, you're gaining more value by having somebody else's handcuff, some other team's handcuff on your roster, because Now you have not lost the starter value of the running back who got injured on that team. You have just gained the backup's value that then becomes the starter when that starter from some other roster in your league goes down. So that's the logic for taking other people's handcuffs early in the year. Now, this time of year, I just need like an immediate answer. And there's less help out there on waivers, and there's less that I really need to target. Like, I don't need a fifth wide receiver at this point. Yep. If I'm starting the same three guys every week and I'm set in my flex spot too. I can drop that fifth receiver. I can drop the sixth receiver, of course. I could drop a second tight end. I could drop a backup quarterback even if I'm past the buys there. So it's just a different world in terms of what you need, what's available, and the moves that you need to make.
I want them all. I want all the handcuffs. So a lot of my teams right now have 4 or 5 wide receivers rostered and like 7 or 8 running backs. Just if I have a receiver that I am not going to start the rest of the way, I am going to drop him for basically any running back that's on a roster and has a chance to, get playing time. I think that's what the type of guys you want to be stashing at this point of the fantasy season.
One more running back who is not a handcuff, but his team's apparent lead back at this point, Jared, is Chris Rodriguez in Washington continued to work ahead of Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt coming out of the bye. Second straight game of 11-plus carries for Rodriguez. He's had 3 such games among his past 4. He's scored touchdowns in 3 of his past 4 games. He also still has 1 reception all season long. They have the Vikings, Giants, Eagles, Cowboys left, so okay schedule. What are we doing with Chris Rodriguez?
Yeah, he's okay. Again, he should be rostered because he's a lead running back. He's not an exciting running back to me. He's playing a lead role for Washington, but not a workhorse role. Just 44% of the snaps this past week, 11 of the 21 running back carries. You do still have Krosky-Merritt getting involved. Jeremy McNichols is still involved. Deebo Samuel is still getting carries for this team. Like you said, Matt, Rodriguez is not going to offer you anything in the passing game. So you're pretty much hoping for a touchdown for him to pay off for you. I do like these next 2 matchups at Minnesota and at the Giants. Minnesota's kind of a neutral matchup for running backs, but the Commanders are 1.5 point favorites in that game against what's probably going to be JJ McCarthy back under center. So you could get a game script where they're able to get Rodriguez another 12-plus carries. And then the Giants matchup, that's been the best running back matchup all season. So I do think Rodriguez will have additional upside in that game. So not exciting, but he's someone who I think can get you through these next couple of weeks as an RB3 or flex play.
I think non-PPR, he gets more interesting, especially for those 2 matchups. I think that you're honestly in trouble if Chris Rodriguez makes sense for your team over the next couple of weeks, unless you're in a particularly deep league. And he's probably already rostered in those particularly deep leagues. So we're really talking about leagues of 12 teams or fewer here. Honestly, Chris Rodriguez is probably not going to help you unless you luck into a touchdown and the other guy that you would have started does not score a touchdown.
Yes, agreed.
Any other sneaky running back stashes before we move on to pass catchers?
Well, yeah, I mean, while we're talking about these handcuffs and need to be rostered, I think 2 guys that I'm stashing right now are Keaton Mitchell in Baltimore and Malik Davis in Dallas, who I think are their team's handcuffs at this point. The Ravens put Justice Hill on IR ahead of that Thanksgiving game against the Bengals. So he's out at least 3 more games. He's out, through the rest of the fantasy season. So I think if Derrick Henry went down, you have Rasheen Ali continue to play that passing down role. He's kind of just taken over the Justice Hill stuff. But I think Keaton Mitchell would be the clear lead ball carrier and be a fantasy starter. And then in Dallas, I think Malik Davis is the guy. They don't trust Jaden Blue. Malik Davis had an impressive 43-yard touchdown in that win over the Chiefs on Thanksgiving. Much more burst and speed than I thought Malik Davis had. So, again, I think if Javonte Williams went down, Malik Davis is the guy we'd be talking about as a potential fantasy starter.
I would expect both of those guys would still be around like RB, 26 or lower in our rankings even if the starters for those teams went down. So they're fine. I predict that if Derrick Henry does go down, we're going to have an argument over exactly where Keaton Mitchell belongs in the rankings that week. Because I'm not sure that I would classify him as the likely clear lead ball carrier. I would bet on him getting the most carries among Ravens, but Rasheen Ali has played more than I would have guessed that he would since Justice Hill went down. And really, we have just 2 games on either side of a game that Justice Hill actually played in quietly.
And I'm with you. I think 12 to 15 touches for Mitchell is what we'd be looking at. He's an exciting player. He's super explosive. And they've already, if you watch these Ravens games the last few weeks, he's been getting like series to himself where they are trying to get him, a handful of touches every game because he is so explosive. So that makes me more confident. Again, he would be at least the leader of a committee if Henry missed time.
They're giving him like Jalen Milroe packages.
Yeah, exactly.
Switching to the receiver side, Jared, Adonai Mitchell, 12 targets, 8 catches, 102 yards and a touchdown versus Atlanta out of nowhere. We knew that the upside was there. What are you doing with Adonai Mitchell off of that game?
I'm still just basking in the glow of this game because as a big AD Mitchell fan, it's not always fun. There's a lot of low lights, but I mean, the guy is clearly a talented receiver. He's big, he's athletic, he gets open, he draws targets at a high rate. He did that in Indianapolis. He's doing it with the Jets now. AD Mitchell, he's been with the Jets for 3 games. He has a 28% target share across those 3 games already. 6 targets in his debut, up to 7 in his second game, 12 this past week against Atlanta. And I think, with Tyrod Taylor under center for the Jets, it's not a good passing game, but it's at least like not pathetic. The Jets in Taylor's 3 starts have averaged 32 pass attempts per game, 197 passing yards, 1.3 touchdowns. So still a bottom end passing game, but it's easier to count on some pieces here with Taylor under center rather than Justin Fields. So AD Mitchell gets the Dolphins this week. The Miami defense has gotten a lot better against the run over the second half of the season, but I think is still beatable through the air. So I think especially if you're a team dealing with bye weeks, there's 4 teams on bye this week. I think AD Mitchell is someone you can plug in as a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, and get pretty nice volume out of that spot.
The thing that Adonai Mitchell did best in Indy was not get on the field. And then when he did get on there, he played his way off of it. So he's still, to me, as a guy that doesn't look capable of maximizing his potential. I'm not buying right now. I'll put in a small bid to stash him. But before this seeming breakthrough game this past week, he had 7 and 6 targets the previous 2 weeks, tallied 3 total receptions between those games. So we've still got a lot more bad than good on tape, on the, in the box scores, in the game logs, whatever you want to say. And this is also for a guy that came out of college not having maximized his talent. So this is the kind of player he's going to be, I think. He's going to flash here and there, and anybody who likes him be like, see, there it is. And then he's going to disappear again like a groundhog in February. So if I can get him for $3 on waivers this week, fine, I'll stash him and see what happens. I'm still going to need at least one more good game in a row, not just a good game somewhere, but I need at least 2 good games in a row before I can think about playing Mitchell. And in week 14, it's just a little bit too late for me to, get it all excited about that type of player.
Yeah, I get it. I think the floor is still low because of the type of player he is and because it's still the Jets passing game. It's still a bottom 10 passing game, if not a bottom 5 passing game. So that hurts. Again, I like the matchup, though. I think the fact that 4 teams are on bye makes him more viable. I will say, too, we need to keep an eye on Garrett Wilson, who is eligible to return next week in week 15. Now, I haven't heard anything on Wilson's progress coming off the knee injury. The Jets have nothing to play for, so it would not surprise me if they just hold him out the rest of the season, which would obviously make AD Mitchell more viable. After Miami, it's Jacksonville, New Orleans, and New England for the Jets. So three pretty nice matchups. Again, I think Mitchell's going to be less viable without the teams on bye, but the schedule, it does shape up pretty nice for him for these last 4 weeks of the fantasy season.
Brenton Strange is another guy that we covered on this show just last week, actually. Here's what to like about him. 2 games back from IR, finished tight end 4 and tight end 8 in PPR. What to dislike about him, though, Jared, is the overall target volume. He's seen just 9 total targets in those 2 games. He's feeding off of an 85% catch rate for the year, which is great. We'd love to see that continue, but it's a tough number to expect to stay that high. Brenton Strange has had 1 finish higher than tight end 16, or I'm sorry, he did have 1 finish higher than tight end 16 over his first 5 games of the season. For the year, he's 22nd among tight ends in expected PPR points per game. Even if we knock out the week 5 game that he left early, jumps him up to tight end 15. So that's fine. But I think you need to keep that in mind as you're considering how to position Brenton Strange the rest of the way, as opposed to just looking at his fantasy scores from the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, he's definitely overachieved. He's definitely running hot. I think tight end 10 to 16 is about how we should value him. The volume thing, a lot of that is just the Jags are, and we've talked about this, the Jags are not throwing a whole lot since their bye week. They're leaning on their running game. They've won a lot of these games recently, been playing with leads. They've been able to do that. Even last week, it was a 15% target share for Brenton Strange, which is not a bad number if that's, on the low end for a tight end. His route rate was back up to 81% last week. He was a bit limited coming off the injury in his first game back 2 weeks ago, but he was back up to full playing time last week. And I think most importantly for me, 2 of the Jags' final 4 games in the fantasy season are against the Colts this week, and I believe it's week 17. And the Colts are 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight end. So if nothing else, I think Strange, if you're kind of streaming at the position, playing matchups, I think Strange for those two Colts matchups looks like a viable, top 12 tight end.
Yeah, if you've just been kind of faking it at tight end for a while and you're looking for somebody to plug in, he can be fine for you on a weekly basis. He's right in that range that you just mentioned, tight end 10, tight end 16. Like I said, tight end 15 and expected PPR points per game. So the targets have been fine for the position. Just make sure you don't overrate him because of how well he scored the past 2 weeks. Keep all of that in mind as you're deciding what to bid and exactly how highly to rate him in your starting decisions the rest of the way. Jared, any other sneaky type pass catchers that you're targeting on waivers this week?
Yeah, a couple ascending rookies I want to call out, and one of them is Jaden Higgins, who we've talked about a lot on this show, but he still remains available in about 2/3 of Yahoo leagues. Caught 5 balls for 65 yards last week. That gives him 9.5 or more PPR points in 4 straight games now. His playing time is still not where we want it to be. His route rate is kind of stuck in the 60 to 70% range. The Texans are being stubborn with that. Higgins also gets a tough matchup against the Chiefs this week, so he's okay wide receiver 4 this week. Better matchups beyond that against the Cardinals and Raiders, but Higgins is just, again, he's trending up, even if the playing time's not where we want it to be. He's an interesting stash. And then Pat Bryant in Denver, their rookie wide receiver. The Broncos came out of their bye last week, and Pat Bryant finished second among the team's wide receivers in routes at 77%. That was a season high route rate for Pat Bryant. He has 18 and 17% target shares in his last 2 games now. So he's another rookie that seems to be trending up at this point late in the season. Decent schedule for the Broncos the rest of the way. Their last 4 against the Raiders, Packers, Jags, and Chiefs. I think the Raiders matchup this week, the Jaguars matchup in a few weeks. I think Bryant, again, in deeper leagues is someone you could plug in there as a wide receiver for flex play.
You've got one ad you can make this week. It's going to be a wide receiver. You've got Adonai Mitchell, Jaden Higgins, and Pat Bryant all available. How are you ordering those guys?
It's Mitchell first easily for me, just because I think he looks like his team's number 1 wide receiver. I mean, 28% target share. The numbers are the numbers, Matt. And he's done that throughout his entire career now. He earns targets when he's on the field, and he's a full-time player.
I got you.
Yeah, I mean, I get the playing time was always limited in Indianapolis, but his targets per route were always super strong. And I think that should continue in New York when you don't have much competition there. Assuming Wilson remains out, that's kind of the sticking point there. I would rank Higgins in front of Pat Bryant. I believe in Higgins' role a bit more. We've seen Sean Payton in Denver do this with wide receivers where it can fluctuate from week to week. Maybe Pat Bryant goes back to being the number 3 wide receiver in playing time next week. So I would take Higgins over Pat Bryant behind AD Mitchell.
Give me Higgins ahead of Mitchell. I think he's a better player. I think he's got a better quarterback with him. Even though CJ Stroud hasn't been awesome, I would rather take 5 to 6 CJ Stroud targets over 7 to 8 Tyrod Taylor targets. And I don't believe in Adonai Mitchell as the player. So it's Higgins for me pretty easily.
I'm going to put together a 20-minute highlight reel of AD Mitchell getting wide open for you to watch tonight.
Why? I know that there are highlights. That's like, honestly, that's part of the case against him is the physicality is there. The maximizing the potential is not. Like, he should have been a 1st-round pick in the NFL draft, but he never played up to it in college. He got outproduced by Xavier Worthy, who I know was also a 1st-round pick, but is also like half his size. So, we're talking about a talented guy who, like I said, I think is going to flash here and there, but is never going to put together an enviable career.
We'll see. He's young. He's like 22, 23 years old. It's his 2nd year in the league or whatever. So we'll see.
One other guy I want to bring up is I don't mind stashing Jaden Reed if I'm looking down in the range of these types of receivers, not in need of a guy who's going to help me right now, but a stash that might help me at some point. I know the risks with Jaden Reed. First off, we don't know how healthy he's going to be at any point, if he's going to get back to full usage. We know that in Green Bay, full usage still means limited usage. Like, he's not on the field as much as, other teams' number 1, number 2 wide receivers. We do know that when he's on the field, when he's healthy, Jaden Reed is an efficient producer. We know that the Packers could use options. I mean, they're coming off a really good game at Detroit on offense, but we've seen this passing game especially be a very up and down over the past few weeks. So they would benefit from having Jaden Reed back in the mix. So if I can stash him, see what happens over the next couple weeks, maybe I've got somebody that I can use over the final 2-3 games.
Yep. He beats most of these other guys in upside. I think Reed is probably not going to be a reliable fantasy starter the rest of the way. It might take an injury to Romeo Doubs or Watson for it to happen, but he definitely beats most of these other guys in upside. The 2 other guys I think they're going to be on waiver wire lists this week are Devon Vele in New Orleans, Jalen Coker in Carolina. I'm not super interested in either of those guys, despite what they did last week. I don't think the upside's there. And we're talking about offenses that Vele and Coker are both, at best, the number 2 targets in their passing game. Vele might even be number 3 still behind Juwan Johnson. I just don't think there's enough there in those passing games to support Coker or Vele as guys that we can count on in fantasy lineups.
Yeah, I think the overarching point for all of these wide receivers that we just talked about, all of them are unlikely to be strong producers for your lineup the rest of the way.
For sure. I mean, I'm stashing the running backs we talked about over all these wide receivers because of the upside that they have.
Switching to defense now, Jared. This is usually the time where I ask you what you like among this week's streaming options. I think we got to switch it up this week and just start talking about the Buccaneers, because we've talked about their playoff schedule the past couple of weeks. Now it's upon us. You know, even if you're not in the playoffs, it starts with this week's matchup against the Saints. They are 5th in our default defense rankings this week because of that matchup with New Orleans. And that kicks off the second best schedule for defenses the rest of the way. And even the matchup with Atlanta next week, that's the quote unquote worst remaining matchup on their schedule, looks better because of Kirk Cousins being in there at quarterback. So if you need a streaming defense and the Bucs are out there, it should be the Bucs first off.
Hey, I do need to apologize to Kirk Cousins, though, because he has been a lot less of a disaster these last 2 weeks than I kind of thought he was going to be. So sorry, Kirk, for making fun of you a couple of weeks ago. I'm with you, though, Matt. I think the Bucs are a great stash. The Bucs are already a top 10 fantasy defense in most scoring systems right now. They're 14th in the league in sacks. They're 6th in takeaways. They're also top 5 in both blitz rate and pressure rate. We want defenses that are going to pressure opposing quarterbacks. So the Bucs, to me, they're going to be a top 10 defense for each of the next 4 weeks in our rankings.
Yeah, and that's the ultimate streaming defense if you can pick it up and just set it and forget it the rest of the way. So assuming the Bucs are gone, who else do you like for week 14, Jared?
Yeah, I think you can take a shot on Tennessee this week. They get the Browns matchup that we've been attacking pretty much all season. That game has a 33.5 point over under. So there's just the floor is at least decent for Tennessee because there's not going to be a ton of points in that game. If you want to get riskier, I think Washington, I mean, that's not a good defense, but Washington they get Minnesota this week. Again, it's probably going to be JJ McCarthy back under center. We know the upside there. And then Washington also gets the Giants the following week. So like they're a low end fantasy option because again, it's not a good defense, but the matchups are there for the Commanders to be a usable unit the next 2 weeks.
I like Tennessee better than Washington. I prefer Miami over both of them this week against the Jets. The Jets are so bad that it seems like Adonai Mitchell is their best player. Really, that's the best selling point.
Yeah, I like Miami. My concern with that game is I think there's going to be a lot of running on both sides of the game, unless the Dolphins get out to a lead, which I don't really count on them doing. I think that kind of limits the upside a little bit. But again, they're a safe play. The Jets are not going to come out and score a ton of points.
Week 15, who do you like besides Washington?
Yeah, lots of nice options in week 15. You get the Bears home for Cleveland. We've talked about the Bears. They've been an opportunistic defense this season, so they've been better in fantasy than real life. So the Bears, the Cowboys get the Vikings matchup. But the Cowboys are interesting now because they've become a good run defense. They've turned into a pass funnel. And if JJ McCarthy is going to be throwing a whole lot in that game, that obviously gives the Cowboys defense upside. And then you also have the 49ers. They're on bye this week, but they come off their bye for a home game against Tennessee. So the 49ers might be the best option in week 15, just as how strong a matchup the Titans have been all season.
I like Chicago better than San Francisco next week. And I was surprised to see that the Bears are rostered in just 16% of sleeper leagues at the moment. You know, I've mentioned before, a good time of year to go ahead and carry multiple defenses so that you're already set for matchups each week rather than having to compete in any given week. That's why we do the whole look ahead. It's why we have the strength of schedule pages available on draftsharks.com, why we've been doing the look ahead as we've gone through, because we want to get you set, whether you have the Bucs available as an option or not. You can find more streaming defense options on draftsharks.com right now, especially in your free agent finder. That's the most important tool when you're making your waiver plans. We'll talk through the most prominent names, maybe some sneaky targets on here each week, but there might be a guy in your league who got dropped that just has no business being available in week 14. So you want to make sure to check your free agent finder to see the best available options for your specific situation, your scoring system, your roster, what's available in your league. Make sure that Draft Sharks is your unfair advantage.